Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jashed. I'm really excited to have joining me today my friend Alison Acerra. Alison is a registered dietitian, a nutrition coach, and a menopause specialist. So we are about to have a very enlightening conversation, I think. But thank you for joining me today, all the way from New York today.
Thank you so much, Jess. It's great to be here.
So I joked about this just before we started recording, but I'm going to start with the really strong question of how do you explain menopause to someone who might not understand the depth of it?
Yeah. It's a great question. And there's so much confusion, I think, out there about menopause. And it actually is a very simple change that's happening in a woman's body that has actually complex implications on her overall health, her sense of well-being. Because obviously, as most of us are aware, there are a whole bunch of symptoms that come on board for a woman who's on her journey towards menopause. So the way I like to describe menopause is basically there are drops in our two primary, very, very important sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So as a woman approaches the menopause, which we would define as 12 consecutive months without a period, there's three stages basically of menopause. There's early menopause, early perimenopause, mid perimenopause, and late perimenopause. And perimenopause really is the anywhere from 5 to 10 years leading up to, again, the menopause, when a woman really loses her cycle. And in that 5 to 10 years, there's a lot going on in terms of hormonal changes. And so the early stage of perimenopause is when we're starting to lose some progesterone and where our estrogen might stay relatively stable. A woman with lowering progesterone, with that very calming hormone. Progesterone is very calming. It can help us. It helps prevent, anxiety. It gives us really great sleep. And so when we're losing progesterone, those are some of the early phases of menopause. And the symptoms we might experience are, again, anxiety, racing thoughts, poor sleep. And then mid perimenopause, progesterone continues to decline. And we're actually seeing widely fluctuating estrogen levels. So estrogen goes very high and then it crashes very low. And it is just sort of a chaotic storm, especially in mid perimenopause. And then late perimenopause is when estrogen just continues to decline along with progesterone, again, leading up to the menopause. So there's a lot going on from a hormonal change standpoint. And then, of course, that is going to have implications systemically across, throughout a woman's body. And so I'm sure we'll dig more into that as we go.
It's such a like I I feel like it's such an important conversation because, growing up, it was only referred to as like I'm sure it was more than just these words, but it's like, oh, the change, like the like, or even more stereotypically is like, oh, women going crazy, and
Mhm.
learning more. Not that I haven't even dug into it, but thank like one of those moments where it's thank God for like social media in this way because people are talking about it more is like learning more about it just by seeing people talk about it more and realizing how overwhelming it is or it would be for someone going through that. And what actually surprised me the most when I first really clicked onto like the time frame of it, it's decades. Like it sounds like it's decades.
Potentially could be, yeah, for some women.
And
Right, right.
still like
Yeah.
I sit here and go like can I like is that even how like I can't even fathom that it could be like even 10 years is a long time but like
Mhm.
potentially 20 up to 20 years or so, right? Like that's a long time and for women to sort of and there's a question in this because my understanding is that women very broadly speaking, like we they still don't really get like as much of the support or well-being like generalized as they really need in this area. That's why like people like you exist, right? But even the stigma against it, like I'm sure it impacts women in work a lot as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I am feeling so grateful now, as I'm on my journey to menopause, and that there is so much more information available. And so I think for women who are really entering this journey now, and even younger women, there's a lot more resources out there. There's a lot more information. There's more research happening, which is all incredible. And so I think we've sort of watched the women before us really in struggle, whether we're, you know, our mothers and our aunts, right, women in our families. And we've really kind of witnessed a struggle. And so I think women, younger women, are really, you know, advocating very strongly for their own care. You know, to say that it's that women are so underrepresented in healthcare, and particularly this group, this demographic, that there's more women who are rising up just as like advocates for more information, more resources, that it's just not, it's been completely unacceptable. And I think we're actually seeing this change happen in the workplace because you know, we're seeing, you know, I'm actually spending more time in the workplace, bringing this conversation to executives, leaders, really trying to bring more education and awareness to women in the workplace. And because it has such a significant impact. I mean, this journey, these changes that are happening in a woman's body have such an incredible, profound impact on her overall sense of well-being, her confidence, her ease in her body, her ability to focus and be productive and in her purpose. And so yeah, so there's a lot of opportunity, I think, now, and employers are really starting to recognize that they really have to be supporting these women. And I was just reading an article that millennial women in particular, who are starting to enter perimenopause, they're entering their 40s, are, you know, sort of preempting the challenges that they're sort of expecting to experience as they continue on towards menopause, and that they're sort of expecting to like reduce their time at work, go half time, go part time, even leave the workplace entirely. But so it's really going to have a lot of implications, I think, on the way women you know, arrive to work, and it's going to have a real big influence on organizations. You know, I think we'll probably see it globally, but certainly in the United States.
Yeah. Is that like is that sort of excuse me, is that sort of idea of it's early in the morning
Mhm.
warming my voice up. Is that sort of idea of potentially like cutting back at work or leaving the workplace entirely, is that from a choice perspective, or is that because they feel like that's the only choice they have? Like
I
which angle is that from?
Yeah, I mean, I think women are sort of recognizing that they're just not willing to compromise their health for their work.
Yeah.
And you know, and I am all for women deciding to, you know, go out on their own, become entrepreneurs, right? Really work on their own terms. And again, it's going to be interesting to see what sort of implications this has for the workplace, because women are so incredibly important and vital to an organization, and they bring such an important leadership qualities. And it's really going to have a significant effect on the overall performance of these companies, to
Oh,
have, you know, lower, like to have fewer women who have been working for several decades, or acquiring all kinds of incredible experience and insight, wisdom, mentorship, right? And so that's going to be really interesting to see. So, and I also love that potentially then women will just decide that they're you know, they're ready to pursue a creative, you know, a passion project, and make a living, you know, living out of it. And that's really exciting too. So
I love that it's become like it is from that more empowered and making a choice for how they want to
yeah.
feel place. Like, and sometimes that is like, for some women, it is going to be, oh, I want to keep doing what I'm doing where I'm at, like, which is,
Hmm.
which is where workplaces, it's not even to tell them they need to, but they would do, like, workplaces would do really well to start to implement things that support women who will eventually be going through this or who are already going through this, because
100%.
it's not even from just like a moral ethical, like, oh, you should, like, that it, yes, but also you're gonna, like you said, you're risking losing workforce or not having your people thrive in the, like, be supported in a way that they thrive
Hmm.
by trying to do it the old way. And I love this empowerment in the decision, and you know that women have more of those options now than they did with our mothers, or especially our grandmothers, like they have
Hmm.
more of those options too. I The way the visual that came to mind when you were talking about like the journey to menopause made me think of like the Lord of the Rings and the journey to Mordor. Like, because I'm like, yeah, no, it probably feels like a lot of that fuckery as well, along the way of, oh God, are we there yet? And
Oh, yes, yes, 100%. I mean, just when you, and this is my experience, but certainly the women I work with, it's like just when we sort of have this sense that we've got it, got some kind of sense of control back on our bodies, that the entire the story changes, right? And there's like a new normal. And so I think that the normal is that there's no, it's like a constantly changing process, a constantly evolving dynamic process, that so the normal really is that there's no normal anymore, at least for some time. And so yeah, it really I think requires of us women to get very clear on what our priorities are, to really double down on our self-care and make that, the most important aspect of how we spend our time. And then from that place, then we have so much more to really give and offer, which is what we do so incredibly well anyway. But I think what ends up happening, and the women that I tend to work with who struggle the most with their menopause are the very ambitious, driven, highly competent, highly capable women who are doing it all, right? They've lived a very active, full, purposeful life and saying yes to lots and lots of things. And so this becomes a time where, we really have to discern what are our deep yeses and what are our fuck nos, right? And
yeah,
really have some very strong boundaries and around all of that and clarity, I think. Because our body just does not have, it just has changing in all of these ways that we just do not have the same sort of resilience to manage the stress in the same way that we used to. And I think that is one of the biggest, that can be one of the biggest challenges for women, as far as like this whole new phase. It's like, oh, I just can't do what I used to do. And that, that really does, I think, challenge, and certainly it has for me, like it's just a sense of my sense of purpose and sort of like my sense of identity and the things that like I really held to be very, very important. I've had to really make some shifts and to really reprioritize and make some adjustments there.
yeah. And I keep thinking of the stigma that's involved, or that has been involved historically as well, of like, um, what that what that perception of women then becomes, or the risk of what that perception of women then becomes if they have to change their priorities. And do you see a lot, even now in the year 2024, of people sort of seeing that as a weakness or anything? Because really it's not a weakness. Like, we can have this conversation and say it's not a weakness at all. It's just a reallocating of resources and a reprioritization of what we choose. But on the outside, what do you see?
I mean, I think it's such a sign of strength, and it is not an easy phase, and it is not easy sometimes to set boundaries, because it requires something very different of ourselves in the way we show up, but also the people around us. Obviously, it's going to affect. And so there's like kind of a shakeup period, I think, that tends to happen. But I really perceive it, and I think many women who are really kind of stepping into this time, this moment, are also starting to recognize their strength in their no, in their prioritizing what's really important. Because I mean, ultimately, also what I see very commonly for women who have a hard time in menopause, and primarily just all of the stress, and whether it's like, emotional stress, spiritual stress, mental stress, or physical stress. There's a lot of stress happening in the body. And again, as I was saying, that we don't have the resilience for it. And I think that ultimately, like when we just are saying yes, and it's from like a people pleasing place,
Mm.
that I think we would all agree is not necessarily from a place of strength. And so when we start to really, radically choose ourselves first, I mean, there's nothing I think, from that we can do from a stronger place, right? To choose ourselves first, especially when society in so many different ways is calling on us to compromise,
Well,
what's most important.
yeah, it's like society, like women already largely overdo anyway. They over deliver, they overserve, um,
Right.
even before menopause or early perimenopause. Like, like where they're generally, that's what we typically tend to see, but they're just not necessarily recognized it. So when there's this sort of backing off to reprioritize, it feels extra jarring.
Mhm.
I would even venture to say, like, and this is a generalization, but I would venture to say, like, it's sort of it's only backing off to the amount that they, like, that is equitable contribution anyway. It's,
Right.
like, because
Absolutely.
and some of that is definitely changing, but you see mothers especially who are just the ones doing, like, being the primary caregivers, but we're also not in a society where it's easy to be a single income family. So, like,
Sure.
so there was,
Sure.
so there's so much extra that
Yeah.
might be going unnoticed or unacknowledged or unaware of.
Yeah. And I think that's a really important point, is that there are many women who, who really, bear a very, very significant burden of, whether it's childcare or taking care of aging or ailing parents, maintaining their performance at in the workplace, right? There is a lot, and it can be very challenging, I think, for a woman, to really, determine where her priorities are. And so this is actually where I think it can be really, really helpful, for women, and this is part of the work I do with them, is to really start to get in touch with some of the more natural ebbs and flows of their cycles, right? So when their body is really calling on them to rest, and this is typically for a woman who has a fairly steady cycle. She's not really gotten too far down the menopausal journey yet. And we know in those first 2 weeks of our period, right? We there's lots of estrogen on board, right? And there's all these incredible neurotransmitters that are being supported. Our serotonin, our dopamine, our mood is high, our energy is high, right? Our mental clarity is really on fire. We're very energized and productive. And this is a time when when we're more likely to be able to do all the things, right?
Yeah.
And then the latter part of the cycle, really the luteal phase, is when, estrogen, we're actually really seeing much more progesterone. And this
Yeah.
is very calming, very reflective, very introverted. It's like I like to refer to, like think of estrogen as being kind of the life of the party. And yeah, and progesterone is kind of like her twin sister, introverted, kind of in the corner, having a deep dive with her, one-on-one with her bestie, right? Just very restful, reflective. And so this is a time in the cycle when our body is really calling on us to take a little bit more rest, maybe not overschedule ourselves, really be more discerning with our calendar. If we do have some control over, what sort of deadlines we have to achieve at work, or, the things that we might do with our family on a weekend, right? That are maybe a little bit more restful, right? So there's ways, I think, when we start to get really, really aware of what's happening in our body, that we can kind of use that to really just to manage our energy better. And so then, of course, when our estrogen comes back on board, we have more to give. We're not so depleted, and we can come back out and really be out in the world in the big way that we know.
Yeah, it feels a little less like burnout, because if we're just trying to fire on all of those estrogen cylinders, right? When that's not always where they are, it's like
Mhm.
we're just pushing, we're just pushing. We have less in the tank to move through when it is the time, if we're not resting.
Yeah, and I think that, and it's not to say that even during the day we can't use the sort of the natural rhythm of the day to our advantage, right? In terms of putting in some of the bigger, more focused work when our energy, for me, that's first thing in the morning, right? I do that's when I write, that's when I do my best work. And then the moments in the day when my energy is starting to dip a little bit, like I just change the type of activities that I do. So there's ways that we can really kind of incorporate more energy management, right? Depending on what our rhythm is, to really prevent that burnout and really kind of just maintain our energy levels throughout the day. And there's always moments that we can just take deep breaths and just settle. And I think we forget, right? Right.
There's
Yeah.
certainly always moments. And it's funny, like,
Mhm.
because I teach that and I'm like, yeah, no, there's still moments that I could find. Like, there is absolutely still moments that I can find. Um, do you find that the women that you work with or that you speak to, do you find
Mhm.
they are already sort of aware of this, like the length of the potential length of the journey, or they just in the confusion, or like how how much more aware are women in generally? And I know this is very like anecdotal, but how much aware are women in generally now versus previous generations, do you think?
I think women are much more aware. And although, I tend to see a lot of women who aren't necessarily even very focused on menopause, because they're not having kind of the typical menopausal symptoms. Like, we tend to think of hot flashes and night sweats, right, as being the sort of the quintessential menopausal symptoms. And there are a lot of women who don't have these symptoms. And so they might come to me because they have brain fog, or they are struggling, they're doing all the right things. I hear this all the time, like, I'm doing all the right things, I'm eating right, I'm moving right, I can't, and I'm gaining weight, and what's happening? And we're not necessarily associating that with the hormonal changes that are happening in their body. So I think that while, yes, women are much more aware of of that they're kind of stepping into perimenopause, they're not necessarily recognizing that, there are certain symptoms that are challenging them that are associated with it, if that makes sense. So a lot of the work then that I'm doing with them is on really on kind of working on their hormonal balance, working on healing their gut, really getting their gut cleaned up, because these are sort of the not obvious to the eye, but the forces that are determining in large part a woman's experience of her menopausal journey.
Mm.
So, we're often and the women that I think that are, say I'm sort of doing all the right things, are eating in the same way that they did when they were 25, 30, 35. And it's like it's a whole new game. So it's
Yeah.
like we have to kind of shift things around and shift what's now the right thing for this new phase. And so that's kind of a lot of work that I do with them, but a lot of working on reducing inflammation, as I said, cleaning up the gut, balancing blood sugars. It's and that ultimately can help with weight loss and weight loss resistance that they're looking for, and body composition goals, but also many of the other menopausal symptoms that they're really experiencing, whether it's brain fog, or or GI issues, or itchy skin. There's more than 50 at least
Yeah.
perimenopausal symptoms that a woman could experience, beyond just the hot flashes.
Yeah, and I think like even that immediately makes me think of anxiety because I know that like in general
Yes,
for
thank
me, I
you.
know my food um triggers for anxiety, so I'm like, yeah, immediately
Mhm.
like it's just, but it is funny that you mentioned that because like even me at 35, what I can eat comfortably now is quite different to me at 25.
Mhm.
And you hear people sort of talk about it, and like there's all the memes on the internet about like being like, you're in your 30s when, but without the sort of recognition of, oh, like that's even, like especially for women, but probably across the board, that's hormonally in some way. Like there is something that is probably playing a role, which doesn't mean that you've got a weaker stomach, quote unquote, but you know,
Right.
you've just got different needs.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it changes how you
Definitely.
how you treat your body in a way. Like even if like I don't force things, but even for me, it's just sort of makes me go like, yeah, I would treat my body differently with that awareness of this is just a need versus it being something just because almost like this subconscious, I'm not as strong as I was before.
Yeah, yeah. Do you and how do you find, I mean, as a 35-year-old, I'm curious, like what are your ideas, sort of views of kind of the menopausal journey? I mean,
Oh,
like
oh,
what's
Alice,
coming up
I've
for
already
you?
I've already tapped you in my mind. I'm like the the moment I suspect we are having a conversation.
Yeah,
Because I'm like, yeah,
absolutely.
no, this is like, I think for me, it's, I remember watching women in my life go through it when I was younger and being able to reflect back on that now and go, oh, they were really struggling because we didn't know. No one knew. Like they didn't. It would have just been this feeling of explosion of emotions and sensation. And um, I think for me, also, I was about to say, like, also how I've raised myself in my adulthood. I have this awareness of, like, for like I just said, for example, like if I have one coffee a day, but if I have two coffees for too many days in a row, my anxious thoughts will immediately like I'll suddenly find myself on a train of thought because my mind has made up something to be anxious about. So,
Mm-hmm.
things like that I'm already aware of, but I know that like, and maybe this is helpful for other people listening in this sort of age bracket as well. Like I want being aware of the length of time of menopause, like of that overall menopause, like or to menopause, um, could feel very overwhelming. So it just kind of motivates me to go, all right, like look at it before it gets to that point and just sort of go like, oh, what can I do to sort of take care of what do I need now? And I do that in large part, like you say, brain fog, and I'm like, oh, maybe that's me. But also like I'm autistic and ADHD, so it happens. Like it's like, oh, I'm either
Mm-hmm.
hyper focused or hyper not. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a space cadet element. But yeah, I think it's just I'm more aware of all of the different little factors that might impact how I feel or my experience of the world or my life. And I'm not like catching them all, obviously, and I don't always know what to do with them all. But, being a coach myself, that's why I always advocate going to someone like in this case, like you, who does specialize in that because it is so helpful just to have another voice who's actually studied it because
Mm-hmm.
it's a thing of going blindly through life and women especially like I'll figure it out or I'll just deal with it or whatever it was like I had this is in answer to the question I promise but like I had surgery in July and it ended up being like a 12-week overall recovery, everything was fine, but I remember having a thought after the fact. So like when we were in New York together in end of end of September, beginning of October, that was sort of the end of the 12 weeks ish, like that was nearing the end. And when I got back, I remember having this thought of like reflection and going, oh, well, I got through it. So I guess it wasn't that bad.
Uh-huh.
And then
Uh-huh.
I immediately, like, I haven't had kids, but I immediately thought of all the women who have had children and are like, who go back for more because
Right.
they just forget. And I'm like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, so I think for me, it's this even, like I might be already on my journey. I don't know, but like even for me at this stage before being on my journey, it's almost like let's not dismiss the experience that we have and let's not belittle it even if we get through it. Let's actually talk about it more because
Mm.
it helps other people. And I think, I relate that to like the surgery. I'm like, oh, a lot of women have had this surgery standard, but also the worst, like the fortunate, very fortunately for me, but also the worst thing I've been through. Like it was just,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that was horrible. And I just
Yeah.
really know how bad it was.
Uh-huh.
I
Mm-hmm.
was fine and I was fine, but it, like it's still the experience you have when you're in it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, right. And so I think you're touching on so many things, and glad to hear that it all worked out
Oh yeah,
okay. You're
everything's
great. And yeah, everything is
fine.
fine. But yeah, it's like, well, one of the things that you had said that I think is so important is the way that you have gotten to be so sensitive to how inputs affect your system. And I mean, I remember in my 30s, I was not that focused on it. I was not that aware really. And I think that I think more younger people are I have a little bit more of a mind body connection, and certainly than I did back in those days. But I think that one of the things that, gosh, I had wish I had known moving into perimenopause was like just how important it was to be able to recognize exactly, to really have a sensitivity, like a body sensitivity, where you could really kind of feel in your body the impact of like you're saying, the coffee, or if I eat this kind of a breakfast, or if I do this kind of a workout, or whatever it is, but like to really hone in on how these things impact you, because when it comes to menopause, that we get much more sensitive to these things, and so if we have kind of a training where we have kind of a foundation where we've already built that skill of being able to really connect into our body and understand what it really needs from like from a deep intuitive knowing place, that will serve. I mean, it will send you so far ahead of the game once you actually get to menopause to really understand exactly what it is you need to do to really kind of dial in your own health and well-being. And that's part of what I'm doing with these women, is helping them to really, really connect in, like, okay, when you eat this much protein at breakfast, how do you feel at 3 p.m.? And then, we get on a pattern, and maybe they have a couple of days where they sort of fall off, and then they really see it. They really notice, just how much that impacted them. And the brain fog comes back, and a lot of the issues come back. And so and their bodies are so sensitive. So yeah, just kind of really being able to recognize, I think, these signals and be able to act on them from a more intuitive place, I think is such an important skill to develop anytime, but certainly, if you can, before you before you get to perimenopause.
Conversation again, because I think it's like it's so misunderstood. And as we know, like you said earlier, like women's health is just under researched. I mean, they could get their shit together a bit better with that. But anyway, like it's so under researched, and it's but it's so impacted. And when we're
Yeah,
talking about half or even more than half of the population, you
right.
you are doing the Lord's work.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I love the work, and I'm so happy to be doing it. It's funny because, I mean, obviously so many of my friends are sort of going through this process now. So it's great to be able to be that kind of a support. But yeah, I mean, I would say that in this time, and part of what also comes is this is being such an empowering moment is like it is not only prioritizing our own self-care and self-needs, but like really advocating and finding our own answers. Because everyone's journey is going to be a lot of the symptoms are the same, but what works for some women is not going to work for every woman. And so we really have to kind of build on a variety of different tools to really to figure out what is the plan that's really going to
Yeah.
support me, about whether it's supplements, diet, movement practices, mindfulness practices, mindset, all of it um, is we have to kind of think about it holistically and build kind of our toolkit because it's not just going to be one strategy that's going to get us through it in a very empowered, easeful, confident way. And, and I think women too, and this was me for a very long time, with my own sort of struggles with hormonal chaos and burnout and disordered eating. And I had thought, I mean, the thought that was in my mind was I can do it on my own. And
Mm.
I think that as women, especially very independent, autonomous, right? Like ambitious, we have sort of this sense that we have to do it on our own and that there isn't necessarily the support around us and we don't. The truth is that there's so much support around us. We just have to be willing and open to sort of receive it. And
Yeah.
and so that's something I just encourage women to really consider is like how much they're potentially sort of pushing away the support that could really change their entire experience and be willing to sort of to say like no I need some help here and because the reality is like we do not need to suffer through to menopause. It just does not need to be such a dramatic challenging time of suffering. I mean there's so many strategies we can put in place and sometimes yeah it does take somebody who's been through it, who's going through it, whose work it is, right, to help navigate through some of the challenges of it. But I mean, 10 years to be potentially in a transitional phase. And then of course, who knows because postmenopause is its own thing too. That can be challenging for some women. That's a long time. That is a long time to lose to, almost needlessly.
Such a significant part, like literally a significant chunk of our lives. And it just, yeah, and I think that's where my brain is like, I can't fathom not having that support. And
Hmm.
like I think of like, yeah, like the generations of women before us who have not had that support. And then I'm sure if they go far back enough, they might have had that support because it was more tribal. you know,
Right. Right,
like
right, right.
yeah. So yeah, it's I think it sounds to me, and maybe this is my brain also, it's like the acceptance of you have your tools, but also just they may work differently on different days.
Yes, that too.
Have you found- It's to me, it's very much like I was gonna say managing. I don't know if that's the right word, but like navigating like autism and ADHD is, but autism especially
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, no, like I'm really good, but also I need this structure, but I also need enough freedom, like it's just like, but I'm going to need something on different days. And it's just it's this balance. But when you sort of get to know your tools enough and get to know your methods enough or
Mhm.
your support structures enough, it's never too far out of reach.
Mhm.
And I love that about the work that you do. It's so important. How can people find you or follow you or
Yeah,
getting
wonderful. So my website is AlisonAcerraNutrition.com. And that is also my Instagram handle. And then I'm also on Facebook. I do have a webinar coming up next Thursday, November 21st. And I will be talking about menopause mastery and the microbiome and talking about all of the crazy changes that happen to our gut microbiome when we are moving through menopause to help beat the bloat and shed those stubborn pounds and really just move through menopause with more ease and confidence. So I'd love to have anybody join that. And yeah, those are the ways.
I'll include that link. So if you listen to it on time, you can go find it, and I'll also include your website link so then anyone can just reach out, maybe book a consult, or if you just want to have a conversation with Alison. She's so lovely and so approachable, and it's been such a pleasure to have you on here. So thank you so much for your time. Um, I really appreciate it. And it feels like such an important conversation, whether you are a woman or not, or whether you are in your journey to Mordor or not. It's, yeah, it's such an important conversation because it helps us understand the people around us at the very least. And I think when we
Yeah.
understand things, we can love them a little better. So
Mhm.
thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jess. It's great to chat with you through all of this. And I think I just appreciate you for, having the container to hold the space and have the conversation. So thank you.